Matthew 9 verses 18 through 26. You have Jesus performing these miracles. And it's interesting in Matthew 9, 18 through 26 that you have Jesus on the way to perform a miracle. On His journey, He performs another miracle. It says, while He was saying these things to them, behold, a ruler came in and knelt before Him, saying, my daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live. So here we have this ruler coming to Jesus. The daughter has just died, but He says, if you lay your hands on her, she will live again. Verse 19, and Jesus rose and followed Him and His disciples. And behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up behind Him and touched the edge or the fringe of His garment. For she said to herself, if only I touch the garment, I will be made well. Verse 22, Jesus turned and seeing her said, take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well. And instantly the woman was made well. So here Jesus is on the way to perform a miracle. This woman who is suffering from a discharge of blood for 12 years, and she is struggling with this problem. And she says, if I could just touch His garment, just touch Him, just the edge or the fringe of His garment, I could be made well. So her faith moved her to action. And that's why Jesus said to him or her, your faith has made you well. She didn't just believe that Jesus could heal her. She acted upon it by saying, I need to touch Him. I've got to touch His garment. If I could just do that, then I will be made well from this problem that I have. And so she did that. In the crowd, she touched. And then Jesus said, take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well. And instantly, the woman was made well. Again, instantaneous, supernatural miracles. That's what you find in the Scripture as far as healings are concerned. Instantaneous, supernatural healings. And so, this woman was instantly healed of this problem that she'd had for 12 years. And she was cured of it. Verse 23, and when Jesus came to the ruler's house and saw flute players in the crowd making a commotion. This was a normal practice of the ancient world. They would have mourners and they would have music in their mourning. And even this is pretty bizarre, but they would have professional mourners that would go and wail and mourn at a funeral. It's a strange custom, but that's what they would do. And oftentimes you would see the great commotion. Have you ever seen footage of the Middle East where women are surrounded by a dead body and they're wailing? They're crying out over the death of a loved one. It's something of that nature. A lot of wailing and a lot of commotion that's going on. The ruler's daughter has died. And he said, go away, for the girl is not dead, but sleeping. And they laughed at him. Now, he was not making a misdiagnosis here of the problem. He was predicting waking her up in a resurrection. She was dead. But he was going to wake her up. And death is oftentimes depicted as a sleep for the body. A sleep for the body. Look at John chapter 11. John chapter 11, Jesus talking about resurrecting Lazarus. We talked about this when we studied the book of John. John chapter 11 and verse 11. After these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. Then in verse 14, Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. So, sleep is a description of death in the sense that's how the body appears. I went to a funeral this past Saturday of a friend of mine who died at the age of 62 from Lou Gehrig's disease. Faithful man of God. And his body was in the casket, and it appeared to be sleeping. That's the appearance it has. Now, this does not refer to the soul as being unconscious or asleep. This refers to the body. Oftentimes the Scriptures will talk about death being a sleep, and it has reference to the body and not the soul. The soul is not even there. The soul has gone on to the Hadean realm. But the body is there, and it appears to be sleeping. And then they laughed at him for saying that, verse 24, verse 25. But when the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand, and the girl arose, and the report of this went throughout all the district. So here you have Jesus going to a funeral and disrupting the funeral by raising the dead. Every funeral Jesus went to, he disrupted it by raising the dead. He resurrected the dead. So here you have again this little girl who had died. Her spirit had gone on to the Hadean realm. He raised her up. The spirit re-entered her body, and she was back in the land of the living. And so this would be a resurrection again of a temporary nature. When you see these resurrections in the gospel accounts, they are of a temporary nature, and what I mean by that is they're resurrected to live in this life, and they will eventually die again. The one who was resurrected to die no more, who conquered death, was Jesus Christ. That's why He's called in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the first fruits of them that sleep. In other words, He's the first one to be raised to die no more. So these others were resurrected just to live in this life and eventually would die again. But, of course, at the end of time, all the dead will be resurrected and brought into judgment. So here you have this funeral disrupted, and this little girl who had died, she was raised from the dead by Jesus Christ. Verse 27 through 31. Well, before we get into that, this shows Jesus' power over death. We see Christ demonstrating His power and His authority. He had power over the storm and the sea to calm it while He was in the boat. He has the power to cast out demons. He has the power to heal those who are sick, to heal the paralyzed man we saw earlier in chapter 9. He has the power to heal people who have a disease, like this woman who had the discharge of blood for 12 years. Doesn't matter how long the sickness was, Jesus was able to cure that woman. And also we see Jesus able to conquer death by resurrecting this 12-year-old girl. Verses 27 through 30. And as Jesus passed on from there, 2 blind men followed Him, crying aloud, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." Now, why would they call Him Son of David? I thought He was the son of Joseph and Mary. Why would He be called the Son of David? Exactly. They knew the Scriptures. Son of David means he's a descendant of King David. David had been dead for over 900 years when this statement was made. So it's referring to David the king. And that he was the son of David in the sense of a descendant of David. Son is often used to describe a descendant, just as father in the Scripture is oftentimes used to denote or describe an ancestor. So, Son of David, this was a title that was given and also affirmed their belief that He was the Messiah. You're the Son of David. Son of David was a title of the Messiah, the Savior. So they have said, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." Of course, they could not see Him, but they must have heard of what was going on. They must have heard the things that this Jesus was doing. Verse 28. Then he entered the house, and the blind men came to him, and Jesus said to them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" They said to him, "Yes, Lord." Then he touched their eyes, saying, "According to your faith, be it done to you." And their eyes were opened, and Jesus sternly warned them, "See that no one knows about it." But they went out and they spread his fame throughout all the district. Now here again we have Jesus showing his power over those who have physical problems. These two blind men are healed of their blindness. He does condition this on their faith. Sometimes Jesus would do that, and sometimes Jesus would not do that. Condition a miracle on their faith. Now, it was not as though the blind men had not heard Jesus was performing miracles. They would not have cried out to have mercy on them, to want to be healed of their blindness, if they had not heard about what Jesus was doing. So that faith came by hearing, and that hearing developed faith in them, hearing about what was going on. And so Jesus used this as a condition: according to your faith, be it done to you. And so they were healed. But then he says, see that no one knows about it. There are some times when Jesus is talking to people and he performs a miracle and he doesn't want word to spread about it. And there are other times when he'll tell people, you go tell everyone about it. There's a reason for that. Oftentimes when he is in a Jewish community, he might perform a miracle and tell the people, don't spread the word. And in other places, when he's in a Gentile region, when he performs a miracle, he'll tell them to go tell what the Lord has done for you. The reason I believe is because the Jewish people would crowd around him and stifle his mobility. And so if word got out about this, you would have that village just full of people bringing their sick, bringing their lame and all of that to be healed. And Jesus' primary mission was not to come here to heal the sick, open the eyes of the blind, and raise the dead. That was not his primary mission. His primary mission was to preach the gospel. And he verified his authority by healing the sick. There are often times when you read in the gospel accounts that Jesus, the crowds were so great and so numerous, sometimes he'd have to get out in a boat to preach to them. Or he would have to go someplace else because of the crowds. And so there are times when he would say what he said in verse 30, see that no one knows it. In 8:4? Yes. Yes, he did. That's a good point. Jesus said to the leper that was healed, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go and show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded for a proof to them. So that's a good point. You don't tell anyone about this. You go offer what Moses told you to offer. So there's a sense in which Jesus had a strategy. Jesus did not want to be a sideshow type of performance. He was not there to perform miracles. He was not there to have a circus. He was there to fulfill a mission. And sometimes the craze for miracles overshadowed his main primary purpose for why he came. And so verse 31 says, but they went away and they spread his fame throughout all the district. They did exactly what he told them not to do. So oftentimes you'll find that. It's like they cannot contain their joy for being blind, and so they go and they do the opposite of what the Lord told them to do. Verse 32 through 34. As they were going away, behold, a demon-possessed man who was mute was brought to him. And when the demon had been cast out, the mute man spoke. And the crowds marveled, saying, never was anything like this seen in Israel. But the Pharisees said, he cast out demons by the prince of the demons. So here you see a demon-possessed man, caused this man to be mute. he was cast out. We talked about demons before. And the people said, we have never seen anything like this in Israel. We talked about how that it's as if God allowed demon possession to take place when Jesus was on earth to demonstrate His power over them. So it was not seen before in Israel. So He's casting out this demon, but the Pharisees, notice their attitude. Instead of rejoicing, they're saying, well, He cast out demons by the prince of the demons. They're not denying the miracle. They can't deny the miracle. They're just saying, well, He gets His power from the devil. I mean, that is a hard, wicked heart to assign the power of God to the devil or to the prince of demons. So that shows their attitude, and as I said before, they don't deny the miracle. They can't deny the miracles. And they just say His power comes from an evil source instead of a good. Verse 35, and Jesus went through all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogue and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction. Notice that. Jesus is healing every disease and every affliction. Every disease that they had back then, when Jesus attempted to heal someone, they were healed. I've been in an email discussion with a person that's a denominational preacher, and he claims that he has a Holy Spirit baptism and that he can heal people. And I asked him that did he heal everyone that he attempted to heal, and he said no. I said, but Jesus did. I mean, here's a passage right here. Every person that Jesus healed was healed. They were healed of their diseases. It was not a hit and miss, maybe 90 to 95%, ratio. Maybe the majority are healed. No, every person Jesus healed was healed. Now, Jesus didn't heal everyone that was sick, but every person Jesus healed was healed. Instantaneously, supernaturally, and miraculously. That's why it was a miracle. Verse 36, and when they saw the crowds, He had compassion for them because they were helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then He said to His disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into His harvest. This ties into chapter 10 when He's about to choose His 12 apostles. He sees the people that they are sheep without a shepherd. And that depicts some of the things that you find in the Old Testament, how that God through the prophets will get on to the so-called leaders of Israel. You're supposed to be the shepherds of my people, and you're not doing what it takes to shepherd them. You're not teaching them. You're not feeding them properly. You're not protecting them. And the same way in Jesus' day, they had religious leaders, but those religious leaders were not being the shepherds they should have been. They were like sheep without a shepherd. They needed guidance. They needed help. And of course, Jesus is the good shepherd, John chapter 10. That was brought into the world to help His sheep. He said to His disciples in verse 37, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. There is a harvest here. These crowds, these multitudes. In other words, it's as if now Christ has got their attention by His miracles. It is time for them to be taught. That was the purpose of the miracles, to get people's attention and then to teach, to prove that their message was from God. And so the attention has been given by the people. The crowds, the multitudes were there. He says it's a harvest and the laborers are few. And He says, pray earnestly of the Lord of harvest to send out laborers into the harvest. We oftentimes use these verses, and I believe rightly so in principle, to talk about the harvest of souls we need to be out involved in trying to harvest. The field is there. The harvest is plentiful. We need to pray for laborers, those who are going to go out and teach God's will, convert people. Look at chapter 10 and verse 1. And he called to him his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out, and to heal every, notice that word, every or all disease and every affliction. And so now, and I believe that's why verse 37 and 38 ties in with chapter 10, verse 1 and 2. He is about to send out laborers on a limited commission to go to the Jewish people. He called 12 special men, his disciples, and he gave them power over these unclean spirits and to heal the sick and things of that nature. Up until this time, Jesus had only been doing it. Now, he's choosing 12 special representatives that will be apostles, and they will have the power. He will give them the power to do this. The names of the 12 apostles are, first, Simon, who's called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, James, the son of Zebedee, John, his brother, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector. That's the one who wrote this gospel account. James, the son of Alphaeus, and Thaddeus, Simon, the Canaanite, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. It's very interesting when you read the list of the apostles, Simon Peter is always listed first. Some have speculated as to why that might be. It might be because he was the oldest. Possibly. That's just speculation. But it's interesting that he's always mentioned at the top of the list first. So, it's good to memorize this and to learn the 12 men that were chosen to be apostles, special representatives of Christ. Now in verse 5, beginning in verse 5, throughout really the rest of the chapter, through verse 42, Jesus is giving instructions to his 12 and is going to send them out into this harvest. He's giving instructions to them as to what they are to do. This is the limited commission. The reason why it's limited is because of what we find in verse 5. These 12 Jesus sent out, instructing them, go nowhere among the Gentiles and enter no town of the Samaritans. Verse 6, but go rather to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. So, of course, this is before his death. And so, he is taking the gospel by his 12 apostles, multiplying his efforts, so to speak, to go to all the region of the lost sheep of the house of Israel. You just preach to the Jewish people. You don't go into the areas of the Gentiles or to the town of the Samaritans. You limit your preaching and your ministry, what you're going to be doing from this point on in this limited commission to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Now, why would he do that? Doesn't Christ want Gentiles and Samaritans to be saved? Why would he limit it just to Israel at this time? What was Jesus? He was a Jew. He was an Israelite. He came unto his own. John chapter 1 tells us. He came unto his own. Romans chapter 1 and verse 16 tells us the gospel is God's power to save to the Jew first, and then to the Gentile. They, being the chosen people of God, would have first opportunity. But it's interesting when you read the scheme of things in the New Testament, those who had the first opportunity to accept Christ and accept His leadership rejected Him. That brought about His death, and that death was a sacrifice for the world. And now the gospel is to go into all the world. By their rejection of Him, that brought about His sacrifice. See, God orchestrated that whole thing. He knew. He knew they would reject Him. He didn't make them, but He knew that they would reject Him. It's part of God's scheme. But they would have an opportunity to hear the gospel and believe. So verse 5 and 6 is why we call it the limited commission. Verse 7, proclaim as you go, preach as you go, saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand. That's what they're to preach. It's at hand. It's near. it's so close you can almost reach out and touch it. In Mark 9 and verse 1, Jesus said, "There are some of you standing here which shall not taste of death until you see the kingdom come and come with power." Of course, Judas would die. He would commit suicide before the kingdom came. So in Acts chapter 2, that kingdom did come. And it's very interesting that after Acts chapter 2, you never see the phrase, "the kingdom is at hand." Because the kingdom is here. In the book of Acts, they're proclaiming the kingdom. But before that establishment of the kingdom, you're to preach it's at hand, it's near. Verse 8, here's what you're to do. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. Freely you have received and freely give. Verse 9, acquire no gold, no silver, nor copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, nor 2 tunics, nor sandals, nor staff, for the laborers deserves his food. In other words, you're going to be taken care of as you go through this area of the Jewish communities. You'll be taken care of. Verse 11. And whatever town or village you enter, find out who is worthy in it and stay there until you depart. In other words, you stay in that area, you stay in that village where you're doing your preaching, in that town. You stay with someone who's worthy. In other words, a good person, a good godly person. You stay with them. Verse 12, as you enter the house, greet it. And if the house is worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if it is not worthy, let your peace return to you. In other words, you greet it, and that word greet does not just mean, hi, how you doing? It's more of a blessing type. May God bless you and your household. And so, the peace of God will come upon that house, but if it's not worthy, in other words, if they reject this message that you're preaching, then your peace will return to you. Verse 14. And if anyone will not receive you or listen to your words, shake off the dust from your feet when you leave that house or town. And so it's interesting that shaking off of dust was a custom that the Jews would do if they entered into a Gentile region, because they thought they were contaminated in being in a Gentile region. Jesus says, if they reject me, even if you're in a Jewish house and they reject me, you shake the dust off your feet and you go someplace else. In other words, Jesus and His message, if it's not welcome, you go find someone who will welcome it. You go find someone who will listen to it. And that's a lesson to us as we try to fulfill the Great Commission and go into all the world, that there are people who are going to reject, and we dust our feet off and go find someone who will listen. And so that's the message that He gives. It's the freedom of choice they have. Verse 15, truly I say to you, it will be more tolerable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for that town. Wow. That's a powerful statement. It will be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah in the day of judgment than for a town that rejects me. Now, we can speculate and think about degrees of punishment, things of that nature. In the afterlife, things that occur like that. I believe to a certain degree, whatever it might be, God knows, that there is, in a sense, a degree of punishment that you find in hell. Because of certain statements like this. It'll be more tolerable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom and Gomorrah than for a village that rejects me. You look at how wicked and horrible and terrible Sodom and Gomorrah was. He says, if a person or a village rejects me, it's going to be more tolerable for the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah. So that's a pretty profound statement. It shows the severity of rejecting Christ. It's like what Peter said in 2 Peter chapter 2 about the person who turns away from the holy commandment. It would have been better for them not to have known than to know God's will and turn from it. it would have been better for them not to have known. Well, how could that statement be unless there is to some degree, shape, form, or fashion, degrees of punishment? Now, hell is hell. Gehenna is Gehenna. Punishment is punishment. I don't want to go and find out what degrees there are. But still, there is a severity that is shown here in verse 15 in rejecting the opportunity to receive salvation. If a person rejects Christ and His will and the gospel of the kingdom of heaven, then there is a severity that's there. So that's something to contemplate, to think about. As wicked as Sodom and Gomorrah was, it'll be more tolerable for them on the day of judgment than for those who reject Christ. That's pretty severe. Look at verse 16. Behold, I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. In other words, you're going into dangerous territory. You're going into severely dangerous territory. Sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and as harmless or innocent as doves. So even though they are going to their own fellow countrymen, their message is not always going to be received or welcomed with open arms. It's going to be like sending sheep in the midst of wolves. You be as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves. In other words, you use wisdom, the wisdom of doing what's right, but you are not there to harm anyone. You have the wisdom of a serpent, but you be as dangerous as a dove. Well, how dangerous is a dove? I mean, that's no danger at all. But you use wisdom, but you be as harmless or as innocent as doves. Beware of men, for they will deliver you over to the courts and flog you in the synagogues. Well, that's, again, something that they're going to have to face. He's telling them, you're going to receive persecution. They're going to deliver you over to the courts and they're going to flog you. And, of course, that was a beating in the synagogue. Scourge you, some translations might say. In the synagogue. Verse 18, you will be dragged before governors and kings for my sake, to bear witness before them and the Gentiles. Now, they were not to go to the regions of the Gentiles, but sometimes they would encounter Gentiles in their work, because they were going to be dragged before them. They're going to be arrested. Things of that nature. Verse 19. When they deliver you over, do not be anxious how you are to speak or what you are to say, for what you are to say will be given to you in that hour, for it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. In other words, their message would be supernatural. Their message would be something that God is going to speak through them. The Spirit of the Father is going to speak through them. In other words, when they are brought into these situations where they're before people, they're going to be inspired men. And they say, don't worry about, he's saying to them, don't worry about what you're going to say. The Spirit of God is going to speak through you. They didn't have to prepare a lesson. God would speak through them. That promise is not for today. That promise was for them when they were brought before kings and such. Today we have God's Word in written form, and we study and we make lessons from it. But Moses, exactly, that's a good point. Moses was brought before Pharaoh, and God says, I'll be with you. In fact, when Moses started making his excuses, he said, okay, Aaron can speak well. Aaron will be your mouthpiece. I'll give you words, and Moses, and you give those words to Aaron, and he'll tell Pharaoh. God didn't give Moses any slack as far as his excuses. You have no excuse, Moses, for doing what I'm telling you to do. And so this ability, if some claim to have this today, they're claiming something that doesn't belong to them. Every person that preaches or teaches a lesson has to study and bring lessons from God's Word that's inspired. Verse 21, brother will deliver brother over to death, and father his child, and children will rise up against parents and have them put to death. This is how serious things are going to get. Verse 22, and you will be hated by all for my name's sake, but the one who endures to the end shall be saved. So he's warning them up front. Here's the persecution you're going to face. You beware of men, because those who reject you, they're going to physically harm you. They're going to imprison you. But don't worry, the Spirit of God will speak through you. You can give the message. God will use you in those situations. And you're going to be hated. And the person who endures to the end will be saved. Not endures just a little while until they can't handle it anymore. The person who endures to the end, faithful unto death, Revelation 2 and verse 10. That is the person who will be saved or receive the crown of life. Verse 23, when they persecute you in one town, flee to the next. For truly I say to you, you will not have gone through all the towns of Israel before the Son of Man comes. So they are going ahead of Christ, so to speak, to really prepare all these villages and all these towns for Jesus and His message. Verse 24, a disciple is not above his teacher, nor a servant above his master. It is enough for the disciple to be like his teacher and the servant like his master. If they have called the master of the house Beelzebub or Beelzebul, depending on what translation you might have, how much more will they speak evil of those of his household? Now, Jesus is making the point here in verses 24 and 25. He said it another way later on. He said, if they hated me, they're going to hate you. If they hated me, they're going to hate you. And so what he's saying here, the disciple is not above his teacher, nor the servant above his master. The goal of the disciple is to be like the teacher. And the goal of the servant is to be like the master. That's our goal as disciples of Christ, as servants of Christ, to be like our Lord. And so in the context here, he says, look, if they called me Beelzebub, the prince of the demons, don't be surprised when they speak evil of you. So he's basically saying, look, they've already said to me in verse 34 of chapter 9, the Pharisees said he cast out demons by the prince of the demons. The prince of the demons, of course, was Beelzebub or Beelzebul. And this individual was a Philistine deity associated with satanic idolatry. You find the name in the Old Testament, 2 Kings chapter 1 and verse 2. It was a Philistine deity. And the Jews took that name and of course they say that this is the prince of the demons or whatever. And so they said, look, they called the master of the house Beelzebul or Beelzebub. So if they're going to call me that, what do you think they're going to call you? Because you're preaching in my name. You're proclaiming my message. So we see here, Jesus is telling them to go out and to do this great work, but He's not letting them go out blindly without understanding. You're going to receive some hard times in doing this. People are going to hate you. And I can't help believing that if we are going to be the Lord's church today in this community, that as we preach the truth in love and speak out against the evils of society, people are going to hate us. They're going to hate us. And we should just be ready for that. They're going to speak evil of us. The homosexuals are going to call us bigots. They're going to call us unloving and hateful because we say in a loving way homosexuality is a sin in the eyes of God. They're not going to like that. And so we must get ready for being spoken against, just like the disciples of Christ on this limited commission. We're going to be spoken against when we, in a loving manner, just tell the truth. This is the truth of the matter. We will be spoken against. Look at verse 26. So have no fear of them, for nothing is covered that will not be revealed, or hidden that will not be made known. Everything is going to be brought into the light, in other words. Verse 27. What I tell you in the dark, say in the light, and what you hear whispered, proclaim on the housetops. In other words, I'm giving you instruction, and when I tell you in darkness or in private, I want you to go out and you proclaim it publicly. Verse 28. Do not fear those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear Him who can destroy both body and soul in hell. So as He's warning them about those who are going to do them harm and such, He says, look, you don't fear them. Here's what you're ultimately to fear. You don't fear people who can kill your body. That's all they can do. You know, we're living in a society and in a world that's becoming increasingly dangerous. You can't go to London now, England, without the concern of a suicide bomber. I hope that doesn't come over here. But because of the mindset of Islam, the fanatical group of Islam, they want us dead. They want world domination. I mean, that's just a fact of the matter. And when people have that philosophy, you can't negotiate with them. They want us dead. They want to take over the United States of America, and they want to make this an Islamic country. And if anyone doesn't convert to them, they want us dead. And so, I don't know how dangerous things are going to get over here, but you know, if you're a faithful Christian, you don't have to be concerned about it. You don't have to really be concerned that much about it because you're not to fear them. We are to fear the one who is able to destroy both body and soul in hell. Of course, that's referring to God. You fear Him. If they kill your body, they can't touch your soul. And if you're right with God, your soul is going to a better place. They've really, in the big picture of things, have done you a favor. But you need to fear Him who's able to destroy both body and soul in hell. God is able to destroy. And that word destroy does not mean annihilate. It does not mean to snuff out of existence. It means an ongoing, perpetual destruction that never ends. Look at 2 Thessalonians. 2 Thessalonians chapter 1. Verse 9, the wicked, those who are not saved, 2 Thessalonians 1 and verse 9, they will suffer the punishment of eternal destruction away from the presence of the Lord and from the glory of His might. That is the eternal destruction that Jesus is talking about here when He says God is able to destroy both body and soul in hell. It's not something that just takes place over a duration of time and then you burn up, you're destroyed. It's a destruction that never ends. It's a perpetual, unending destruction. And we are to fear God because He's able to destroy our body and soul in this place called hell or Gehenna. Verse 29, are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? And not one of them will fall to the ground apart from your Father? He says, look, if 2 sparrows have the value of a penny, or a small Roman copper coin, and not one of them falls to the ground without the Lord being aware of it. He's aware of all things. He says, is He not going to care for you and be concerned about you and know what you're going through? Verse 30. But even the hairs of your head are numbered. Fear not, verse 31. Therefore, you are of much more value than many sparrows. God is concerned about the minutest creature on this planet. He created it. He created all of them. He takes care of them. And He's aware of their demise. He's aware when they die. He said, you're of much more value than they. You're much more valuable than many sparrows. I wish our environmentalist people would understand chapter 10 and verse 31. Humans are much more valuable than any animals. It doesn't matter if they're on the extinction list or not. Now, I'm not saying we're to go out and just kill willy-nilly and just kill off as many animals as we can. We're to be good stewards of this planet. But humans are of much more value of any animal. All the animals put together. God cares. He cares about His people, and that's why He says, fear not, you're valuable to me. I will be with you when you endure these persecutions in these hard times. We'll continue with chapter 10 next week, Lord willing.